All right, so I want to, and I need a bell. Hey, good morning. Glad you're all here today. Nice to see everybody for our small group. I want to start today. We don't have a lot of time as always, but I'm going to tell you a true story, and I really want you to pay close attention to the details because you're going to discuss these details at your table for a few minutes. Okay? Here's the story. Miss Johnson was an 85-year-old African-American woman, widow, who lived alone on the second floor of an apartment on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Okay? It was an independent living facility. She had no family left, and the only people who visited her were her kind elderly neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, who had earlier that day helped Miss Johnson take her car to the mechanic. Okay? On weekends at this facility, they hired a security guard, a guy named Jeffrey, to patrol the property, and his hours were 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Okay? And Jeffrey knew all the tenants. He actually knew their schedules. He kind of was able to, after a period of time, really know their routines. And he quickly noticed when something didn't look right. So it was a warm Saturday night in June, around 8:30 p.m., and the light was just beginning to fade to dusk when Jeffrey was walking his usual route around the apartment complex, and something caught his eye. He noticed movement in Mrs. Johnson's second floor bedroom. Through her bedroom window, he saw a young white man in a hoodie that he had never seen before, and the man was swinging a baseball bat back and forth with intensity. And Miss Johnson, well, she was out of sight, but he could clearly hear her screaming. Jeffrey's heart raced. He'd seen plenty of incidents in the past, but nothing like this. And in that split second, his mind raced, and he could tell that she was in real danger, and he ran towards the apartment. What do you think's happening? I'll give you some scenarios. The young man broke into her apartment, assuming she was not there, and she startled him, triggering the attack. Or Mrs. Johnson was being robbed, and she fought back. Or the young man was mentally unstable, and Mrs. Johnson was just a random victim in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or Mrs. Johnson had been targeted by someone pretending to help her. What do you think's happening? Take a moment in your small group, in your little table, and discuss what do you think's happening in that scenario with all the details I mentioned. Okay? Awesome. Okay. This is fun. All right. So tell me per group, what do you think happened in that story? We'll maybe start over here. Did you have a consensus, or was there a bunch of different opinions? What did you think? How sinister did it get? Yeah, no.
There wasn't a raccoon that got in, and he was trying to get the raccoon.
Oh, okay. All right. That's good. All right, so that's kind of where you went? You thought maybe that was...
No, that was me.
Oh. All right, that's good. Anyone back there? And maybe startled her or something. Okay, yeah. Okay, very good. And you guys haven't?
We thought it was a mouse.
A mouse, okay. All right, very good. I love it.
We're a rat, and the guy is the grandson of the Robinsons that came to kill the rat.
How about that? Wow, that's very good.
That's where we were.
You thought same thing?
Listening to it.
Oh, you thought?
I guess I was the only one at the table.
Wait.
But they're in a play together and he's rehearsing.
Oh, okay, there we go. That's great. That's interesting. So what I did in this story, it's a true story, but what I did is I planted implied, I gave you 14 different words or images that would kind of slant the story. They're part of the story, but by including them, and I don't know if you can think of any of the 14 that might have caused you to think a certain way or to... Huh? Hoodie. What does a hoodie imply to you?
Sinister thing. Yeah.
Sinister. Okay. It kind of conceals identity, maybe. Okay. That's a good one. All right, that's one. Young man. So there's an age imbalance, young man versus an elderly woman, okay?
Racial.
Racial, white versus black, okay? That's another one, yep. How about, there's some more.
Second floor.
Second floor, what does second floor imply?
Hard to get up.
Hard to get up, out of there, yep, okay. Yeah, there's some vulnerability to that. Nighttime, yep. That's kind of, my mom always said nothing good happens after midnight. So there's something about nighttime, right? That brings out more. There's another detail. I'm really relieved you haven't picked up on it.
Senior citizen home?
Well, okay. Okay, so there might be, yeah, there's a sense of vulnerability being in a place like that.
You have to get ID to get in.
Okay, usually, yeah. A baseball bat, right? Because that in that context, it's not a sporting equipment. It's kind of a weapon, right? Okay. How about the city? Did anyone? Well, how dare you? I thought that. I wanted to see if that would cause anyone to be like, that shady town. Of course, yeah. All right. How about the fact that the security guard didn't recognize the young man? Could that have been a kind of a stranger danger? Okay. Let's see. Anyone pick up on the screaming like that? That's an indication of trouble, right? Okay, very good. Yeah, that's good. And alone. She lived alone, so that would be another one. So, all right. Well, do you want to know how the story ended?
Yes, please.
Well, come back next week. No, I'm just kidding. So, really interesting. But when I went to visit my grandparents that Saturday night, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. I'm the grandson. Their neighbor, Miss Johnson, had just frantically entered my grandparents' apartment because a bat was flying around. And the only thing they had at their disposal was a baseball bat that they kept near their front door. So I entered Miss Johnson's apartment with a bat.
You were the one.
I'm the one, yeah. And because I can hit a pickleball, but I can't hit a bat. And so I'm swinging at night at this bat, and the bat kept flying towards her, and she was screaming bloody murder because she was so afraid. And when the security guard came up and heard the screams and saw me as a white man in a hoodie with a bat, he was very concerned, and we all got a big laugh out of it. Well, eventually, and I did get the bat. The bat was eventually killed. So, but here's the thing. I told you a true story, right? And I gave you a lot of details about it, but there's something I didn't give you. All the information, right? I gave you enough to kind of have a really curious discussion, but I didn't give you all the information. And I did that on purpose because when we get into politics, sometimes we're not always given all the information, are we? It doesn't matter which source you get it from. We don't get all the information. And today I want to talk about this idea of submitting to leadership and suffering under it. And I'm going to try to make the connection because I want to talk about this concept of black versus white. And I don't mean racially, but this concept of black versus white. Because we all have it, right? And I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I live in the gray. The black and white isn't as black and white to me. And I think if we're honest, it's not as black and white for all of us either. If I told you at the beginning, I want to talk about black, white, and gray in that context, and then I told you this story, you would have maybe have assumed, well, this is black and white. I heard one of the groups, as I shared the story and you went in, somebody said, well, this is obvious what happened. And that was the whole point, is it wasn't obvious what happened. You know, some of you are, I've got to be careful about Kathy. She's onto something, she knows. But I did it this way because I wanted us to really talk about this black and white. And I want to think about how we see the world. Sometimes we see the world in very black and white issues, right? Very black and white ways. You're either right or wrong, you're good or bad, it's us or them, right? In a lot of ways. Sometimes the lens that we use to judge everything that there's something that's either completely right or completely wrong. There's no middle area. There's no room for this thing called the messy middle, right? We kind of simplify life in a way that we forget that people and stories are complicated, aren't they? It's complicated. It's not as easy as black and white. And we tend to divide everything, whether it's politics, people, problems. We tend to do it into sides. There's one side versus the other. And then we call that the truth, don't we? So the truth was Mrs. Johnson was in some level of danger. In her mind, it was very real danger to her. And the truth was I was in her bedroom swinging a baseball bat.
Wearing a hoodie.
Yeah, wearing a hoodie. Wearing a hoodie. But I think if we're honest, don't we do this all the time in our lives? We hear a story and we make a quick judgment based on what we see, what we've been told, and there's more to the story. There's actually a messy middle. There's a complication to how people and people are. So this black and white, I want to just run through some of these really quickly. But right to life and right to choose. You know the issue, right? Okay. And in this room, we're divided down the middle. Probably we have some that are one side, one the other. Life begins at conception. Abortion is morally equivalent to taking a life. And the other side, the black and white side, is a woman has full autonomy over her body, and the government should have no say in reproductive choices. Okay, that's the black and white. What's the gray? What about cases of rape, incest, threat to the mother's life? When does compassion intersect with conviction? Okay, how do we support mothers after birth as passionately as we defend life before birth? This is a really sticky question, right? And yet oftentimes we're in one side or the other, and that's just it. If you don't believe what I believe or I don't believe what you believe, you're wrong, because I'm on the side of truth. That's how we operate. Death penalty, here's another one, black and white, right? Death penalty is biblical justice. Eye for an eye. It deters crime and it honors victims. That's clear, right? Or all life is sacred, and taking a life, even if someone who's guilty, contradicts the gospel of mercy and forgiveness. What's the gray? What about wrongful convictions? Happens. What about extreme cases of evil? Don't they deserve to die? How does mercy and justice coexist in a fallen legal system? It's gray. It's really gray. Euthanasia versus assisted suicide, right? It's only God decides when life ends, and we shouldn't assist people in their death because that's playing God. Super clear, right? Or compassion might mean ending someone's suffering. People deserve to die in dignity. What do you do? What's the gray? What about terminal illness? Does that matter? What about unbearable pain? What about a loss of autonomy? Is that a life? Is prolonging life always the same as honoring it? Gray, really gray. I could go on. Marriage. Marriage is exclusively between a man and a woman. Scripture says that, right? That's black and white. Then there's the other side. Marriage equality is a fundamental civil right. Love is love, right? What's the gray? Well, how do we hold biblical convictions while showing Christ-like compassion? It's messy, right? There's a middle. Can the church maintain theological clarity without being cruel? These are good questions. Go on. Gender and sexual identity. I mean, we're getting into the heart of it as Methodists, right? God created us male and female, right? Gender's biological and is divinely designed. But there's another side. Gender's fluid. And individuals should define their own identity and expression. So how do we walk with people who are struggling with their gender? How do we truly, as compassionate, Christ-like people, help them without dismissing their humanity or abandoning our truth? What does pastoral care look like in that setting? I can go into immigration and border control. There's two sides of that, right? I can talk about gun rights and gun control. I can talk about war and those who are pacifists for war. I can talk about truth in the media and misinformation. There's sides, right? There's very clear sides. And yet there's also a middle. And I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we are so conditioned by what we have heard all of our lives or what we've read all of our lives that we forget there is another side to the coin, and then there's that in between the coin. And I think God lives in between the coin more than we think. That's my perspective on how I understand things. Black and white issues test our convictions, but gray ones test our character. Let me think about that. Black and white issues test our convictions, but gray ones test our character. In the black and white, we find moral clarity, but I think in the gray, we find spiritual maturity. So we're talking about submit or suffer. It's this idea of give to Caesar what is faith in politics and God's kingdom. It's part of that series. Because in the gray zone, where's the gray between obedience to the law and resistance from it when it crosses the line? That's a gray area, isn't it? How about trusting God and then also challenging the system? How do you live in both? It's a gray area. We have to figure out how to do that. What does submission look like when the system is unjust? Are we supposed to just submit all the time, everywhere, even if the system is unjust? I think followers of Christ are called to submit without surrendering our integrity. I think we're supposed to suffer without losing our hope. And I think we're supposed to trust that God's justice still reigns even above human power, when that power doesn't make sense. So there's lots of scriptures I can lead you to. 1 Peter 2 talks about where Peter writes, submit to every human authority, even when you suffer for doing good. Peter's writing, remember, under Nero. You know anything about Nero in your history? So you talk about an unjust system, and that's the context that Peter says you should submit to every human authority, even when you suffer for doing good. Then in Romans 13, Paul says, but be subject to governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God. So Paul's saying this, and Paul's writing this in the context of the Roman government, who were very unjust in some ways. And I don't think Paul's endorsing tyranny, but I think he's reminding believers that God's sovereignty stands above Roman rule. And then Acts chapter 5, Paul says we must obey God rather than men. So there's this line in the sand, right, of sometimes we just have to say no. We're not going to do that. We're not going to follow the law in that context. And we see the apostles, they show submission right up to the point where obedience to man would mean what? Disobedience to God. And they weren't going to cross that line. Last week we looked at Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how the law said there was a 90-foot golden statue and you needed to bow to it, and if you didn't, you were thrown into a furnace. And we saw faithful resistance to that. They were not going to cross that line, and God obviously saved them from it. They honored the king, but they refused to worship him in the way that they wanted. And then even in Matthew chapter 26, what do we see when Jesus is arrested? What does he do? Does he resist? He submits to it. Why? Because the ultimate unjust system, arresting the most innocent man who's ever walked the planet, Jesus trusted that God's plan would prevail in the end. So I want to just share a couple thoughts here. Submission isn't blind. It's actually a form of trust when we submit in some context to the government. And I know I'm speaking about this in our current administration, but I'm trying to keep it above and beyond that, because this current administration may not always be the current administration. There's going to be a next one, and so we have to kind of keep that in mind. But submission is not agreement or approval, is it? It's just simply trusting that God can work through an imperfect system. Would you agree we have an imperfect system? We're on the same side on that one? Okay. Yeah, it's an imperfect system. We see this with Joseph, right? Remember Joseph was in Egypt, falsely accused of what? You remember? He was sold into slavery by his brothers, right? I mean, if anyone was in an unjust system, you remember when he was accused of rape, virtually, and he was thrown into Potiphar's prison. And remember when he finally met up with his siblings who sold him into slavery, he said, what you intended for evil, God meant for good. So you see that there's this submission where he wasn't submitting because, this is just a good way to be. He was saying, I'm submitting to it because he was trusting that there was a greater result with God in that. Suffering isn't failure. It's actually a form of fellowship. We see this in 1 Peter 2. It says, they hurled insults and Jesus did not retaliate. Unjust suffering becomes a witness to a watching world. When Jesus was being mistreated, flogged, beaten, spit, mocked upon, what was his response? Did he say, my dad is bigger than your dad? He could have. He said nothing. Even though it was unfair, it was unjust, he went, as they say in the scriptures, he went to the slaughter silent like a sheep, We see this in early Christians under Rome. They refused emperor worship. They submitted to laws, but then they suffered for their faith as a result of it. But their quiet endurance actually changed the empire. It actually changed the empire eventually. How about kingdom posture, strength under control? Is biblical submission weakness? Or it's meekness? We got into the difference of that, right? Did I tell you a story with my kid, right? The difference between weakness and meekness? Because that's, you weren't here. Okay, so if you've been a parent, right? And you had little kids, and or niece, nephew, uncle, whatever, aunt, and you're wrestling with a child. I always wrestled with my kids. I love doing that. It was like a favorite thing. But when you wrestled with your kid, you never wrestled them full on, right? I mean, I might pick up my son and I would slam him on the bed, or at least he thought he was being slammed. But when it got to the point where he was about to hit the bed, I removed all of the inertia and he landed softly, right? Because that's what a good dad does. And he loved it and he wanted more of it, right? And that's an example of not weakness, it's an example of meekness. Meekness is power restrained or power withheld. It wasn't that I didn't have the power to hurt him, is I was taking all that power and I was holding it back for his benefit. That's meekness. We kind of sometimes view meekness as weakness. Those words in our mind, we think it's meek. But Jesus was meek. When Jesus was before Pilate, it wasn't because he lacked the power to do anything. He literally restrained it. That's why when Pilate said to him, don't you know who I am? Don't you know I have the power to release you? And Jesus says, you have no power except that God gave it to you. And if I wanted to, I could snap my fingers, said it was something like that, and he could call what? Legions of angels to come down and release him. So Jesus was not unaware of his power. He was taking all that power and he was withholding it not because this was a just system, because why? He trusted his Father's plan above the current administration. And this is where it gets really hard for us, isn't it? It's really kind of messy because we all don't have the wisdom of Christ in purest form. We have access to it. But sometimes it's hard to know, when do I stand up and say, I'm done with this? Enough is enough. And when do you say, I need to submit to this because I trust that God has a bigger plan? And this is where it gets hard for us, because you could make some arguments, well, it's black or white. And I want to argue there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of gray. That's why if you have a conviction about something and you are this is your black and white issue and you want to put a stake in the sand, it's really hard for me to judge that because I'm not walking in your shoes. Whereas I might choose the other side, or I might choose the gray and say, you know what, I gotta be careful here. I'll tell you, it's hard as a pastor. It's really hard as a pastor to be a pastor of a diverse church. Because if you walk out this door and you go to another church, most of the other churches out there, I'm not sure if you're aware of that, they're one-sided churches. And they're one-sided from the pulpit. I mean, and you might think we are too, I don't know, but we try really hard to be the gray. Not out of a lack of conviction, but of a lack of saying there's more to the story. It isn't as obvious as as I read or as I've been told or as I've studied. There's a bigger gray issue here. So I want to leave just a couple takeaways, and I want to talk about it. But submission is about position. It's not about being passive. And I think we can honor authority without endorsing its corruption. I think there's a way to do that. I think it requires a lot of humility and a lot of wisdom. And I think it requires all of us to really get in prayer and say, God, how do I honor authority I don't agree with, and yet do it in a way that doesn't endorse the corruption I might feel is happening, you know? Suffering for doing good is not wasted. It's actually a witness. Think about if you've ever seen someone. I'm watching baseball right now. You know, I'm loving the Dodgers. I'm a Philly guy, but I really just love this Shohei Ohtani. You know this guy? Jeez, man, he is just what an athlete. And a couple games ago, it might have been earlier in the season, but he was at the plate, and he's their star player. Honestly, he's a generational talent. He's probably the best baseball player. I think you can make an argument that has ever lived. Like, he is that good. He's doing things Babe Ruth did and beyond, and we all have this image about Babe Ruth. So Shohei Ohtani's up at the plate one of these games, and he's hit by a pitch. Now, he's the most valuable, monetarily, the most valuable player on the Dodgers. And they all know it. I mean, they're all riding on his coattails. I mean, they're all really good players, but if you're going to hit Shohei Ohtani with a pitch, you better know the dugout is going to clear. They're going to clear. I'm sure management would come down and be like, don't hit this man. He's our cash cow, right? Because he's that good. He's at the plate. He gets hit by this pitch, and immediately you could see the dugout was just up. Like, they were like, let's go. Like, you're not going to hurt our guy. And Shohei, after he got hit, they wear all this armor now because the balls are fast. And he's taken off his different guards, and he looks back to the dugout, and he does this. And what's he saying? Don't come. Don't fight. Don't clear the bench. I got this. He had just suffered, right? He just got hit by a 95-mile-an-hour pitch. And was it right? Was it on purpose? I don't know. It might have been on purpose. It might have been an accident. You never know. These pitchers can't control every pitch. But his suffering for doing good wasn't wasted, right? It actually turned into a witness. Think about all the little league players that are watching this. I think about, I used to coach soccer, and the worst part of it was the parents. The worst part of it. It got to the point where I had to literally start every game by going to the bench with the parents and say, this is the ground rules. I will end this game. I will kick you off my field because it was that aggressive. And I was a young kid at this point. I was wearing a hoodie, you know. I was like, I have a bat. Don't mess with me, you know. But Shohei Ohtani was showing us, hey, this suffering for doing good is not wasted. It actually became a witness, and it communicated volumes to people. And you could have made an argument, well, it wasn't right? It was unjust. I get it. It was on purpose. Yep. All those things might have been true. And yet at the same time, he said, don't come. I got this. I'm going to take on this suffering because it's going to create a witness for the sport and for the team. So, and you see this in different examples. Christ-like submission, if you think about the scriptures, it's powered by trust, not fear. The world says, fight, fight, fight. And Jesus says, trust me. Trust me. And I think we got to make some decisions of how are we going to live out our faith in 2025 in the midst of a very black and white political culture. And I think that's why God gives us a lot of room to say, live it out, pray about it. Walk with your convictions, but at the same time recognize that it's not as obvious as you might think. There's another side to the story, and maybe what you've been hearing isn't all of the truth. Maybe there's some things held back, probably intentionally, to create division, because division sells papers, right? Division creates ratings. And maybe we need to be wise and say, okay, God, there's probably more to this story, and how do I hold back? And we see examples like that with Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement, of how the unjust suffering they went through. But that suffering was not for no reason. It was actually created a lot of good out of it, because Martin Luther King kept saying, don't clear the bench. We got this. We got this. We see Dietrich Bonhoeffer submitted to Christ over Hitler. And his suffering testified louder than his sermons. You don't know Dietrich Bonhoeffer because of his sermons. You know him because of his suffering. He was saying, I got this. Christ is calling me to this. Jesus before Pilate, and even in modern day, the church in China. Church in China is under tremendous persecution. And they're underground as a result of it. But they're submitting outwardly, but they're thriving inwardly. They're putting on a front of saying, okay, we'll honor your little government, but underneath, we're going to worship the King. And I think there's a way to do that. So I want to leave with this question. What if God's plan for changing the system starts by changing how we respond to it? Think about that. Well, let me pray for us, and then we got to get going. God, I'm grateful for this time, thankful for this safe place to talk among friends, among other believers, about some really hard topics of what's true and what's not, what's good and what's bad, what's black and what's white. And I think you live in the gray. There's not just two crayons in your crayon box, black and white. There's a numerous number of shades and gradients. And I think the closer we get to understanding that, maybe the more gracious and patient and wisdom we can have in helping a fallen world who's struggling at the same time. Give us wisdom in all these things. In your name we pray. Amen.